Good evening, everyone. On behalf of the 2020 Outstanding Atlanta Board of Directors, I would like to welcome you to our second Outstanding Atlanta Town Hall meeting titled Speaking Out, Standing Together, Coalition Building. I'm James Hammond, the president of the Outstanding Atlanta Board of Directors, and today in America, we are in unprecedented times. We're dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic, and tensions are at an all-time high, and it's leaving a lot of people asking the question, what can I do to make this place better? Tonight's discussion is centered around the topic of coalition building, because we know that when we're working together, there's nothing that we can't overcome. Today, I'm honored to introduce Ann Kramer, a woman that I've admired for years for championing so many causes in our communities, from education inequalities to the work that she's done over her lifetime in the space of community improvement. Ladies and gentlemen, I give you our chairwoman of the Outstanding Atlanta Board of Trustees, Ann Kramer.
James, thank you so much. And I am so grateful to you and Candace Bazemore and the current board of Outstanding Atlanta for putting together these extraordinarily relevant town halls. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Hi, I'm Ann Kramer. I get to be the chair for Outstanding Atlanta Board of Trustees. And it's within that context that only through our community coming together, being together, working together, can we really stand together to address some of these most critical issues across the nation, and now especially in our own great city, Atlanta. We are seeing Americans coming together to denounce the unjust killing of George Floyd. We know that that was true for Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and now we add our very own Rayshard Brooks to the list of so many whose names we know and we will say because we see them. But we want tonight to be able to come together to discuss not just police brutality and the need for extraordinary, real change within law enforcement, but the abuse of power and even more, an unfair justice system that has disproportionately impacted Blacks and Brown people. Over the last few weeks, we've seen an unprecedented unrest from peaceful marches, rallies, and sit-ins, in even some violent looting, vandalism, and rioting. Although all these actions take place along the spectrum of protest, we encourage everyone to direct your frustration towards nonviolent action, coalition building, and community engagement in order to create opportunities for what? Long-term change. For over 50 years, Outstanding Atlanta has recognized local leaders who exemplify commitment, yes, to their professional excellence and to their involvement in community service, involved as engaged citizens to make a difference. With service and leadership as the guiding pillars for Outstanding Atlanta, we would like now to bring our community closer together through this, our second town hall meeting, to take a look at how we can begin to not just make a difference, but to make change. Long known as the city too busy to hate, and that's the moniker we may or may not keep, or the Atlanta way, which we may or may not keep, but to change and keeping our community together in dialogue, civil rights, civic discourse, coming together as citizens to make a difference. We are together, standing out, standing together, focused on current protest, the issues that face our community, especially social justice and racism, and how we come together to collaborate to create the change we know we need for all of our people, all of our people. We did have our first virtual town hall meeting, which was fabulous, and it really focused on the topic of unity. But tonight, since we're all feeling that sort of deep pain, anger, frustration, disillusionment that comes from the racial injustice, the hatred, and all of the things even related to health, economic, financial, education, housing, and policing inequities, We want to come together as our community as we live through just the COVID pandemic alone, but also the pandemic of 1619, which is the beginning of the unjust racial inequities. So we want to begin to express, I think, tonight you'll see what is right with Atlanta, a panel of people who through their lives have worked towards those social justice issues, striving to do faith over fear, hope over despair, love over indifference. And you noticed I don't say hate. Indifference is what we're looking to be able to break that paradigm, to act out of commitment, and especially over everything, to strive for justice and peace among all people, and respect the dignity of every human being, and to claim the vision that is Atlanta's, to lead the way in civil rights, civil justice, civil discourse through a renewal, of recapping who we are. And as we often quote Martin Luther King Jr., and especially as he is thinking through strategically about how we talk about peace, and sometimes we don't really want peace because we just want order, for everything to go back the way it is. Not quite. Because the absence of tension actually is what can create the fuel for justice. More light, less heat. You might need more heat and light. And tonight we'll get to see light and heat with these extraordinary panel members. Tonight, speaking out, standing together, coalition building. We are better together. The panel will be moderated by our wonderful friend and all our outstanding Atlantans. I always like to remind you, over 50 years, we have a lot of fabulous outstanding Atlantans. And so tonight will be moderated by our friend Jovita Moore, who is just coming off of her news show, as well as, and I like to say, I hope they will claim me as this panel is a group of my dear best friends, Jay Bailey, Rodney Bullard, Maria Valias, Bill Bowling, and Nathaniel Smith. So with that, tonight, speaking out, standing together, coalition building, and all that we have for the work that we can do. So Jovita, it is such a joy to welcome you. We're thrilled that you could join us, and so glad that you could lead this panel tonight. Jovita Moore.
Anne, thank you so much. And I want to say good evening to everyone. Apologies for joining you a little late. Had to wrap up the early newscast here at Channel 2. But thank you all for being here. And I hope we have a great audience, because I know all of you will have great things to say. Rodney, I'm going to start with you. So given everything that you know right now and everything that's happened, what do you think is the biggest challenge now that we face as a community at this moment?
Thank you, Jovita. Thank you. I was trying to watch the news, but I wasn't able to catch it because talking to these friends of mine, I think the biggest challenge that we're facing is division. Jay Bailey is fond of writing in his emails, "Thank you for being a bridge." And I think about that. And I think about the connotation of that. It's a positive connotation. It's a positive image. And really, typically, we're trying to introduce one another to either people or opportunities. But I also think about what happens when we don't have a bridge, when we're divided, literally, as we are now. And I think about all of the ills that really occur from that. One, you have inequities, and we see the fallout of inequities. We see inequities as it relates to over-policing. We see inequities as it relates to healthcare. 83% of the people in the state who have contracted COVID-19 are African American. We see inequities as it relates to education. Look at the graduation rate for Black males in APS, and it's abysmal. It will make you shudder. And look at economic opportunities and the lack of economic opportunities. And so those inequities are throughout, oftentimes, particularly during this time with George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and Ahmaud Arbery, we're talking about policing reform, and policing reform is so necessary. But it's also reformation that is needed in so many other areas. And we need to use this time to push to push for reform in all those areas, because we do have inequities. But we also have mistrust. And it's natural to have mistrust when you don't have a bridge, when you don't have connection. You always wonder, well, what's on the other side? What are those people over there doing? And finally, we have false narratives. We begin to make up stories about the people on the other side. We begin to make up stories about people who are not like us. And that is, that's dangerous. And so we have to get over our division. It is the thing that is plaguing us. And we think that it just started. It is not. We've had division in our society for a long time. And now we have social media that exacerbates it. We have ways in which we can see it and we can record it. But we also have tools in which we can change it and we can bring people together. And so I'm grateful to be a part of this panel and this effort to bring people together. So thank you for the question.
So Rodney, let me follow up by asking you, so how do we bring people together? How do we build coalitions to now move forward from this point?
I think it's a great question. And I've seen a lot of people talk about planning and process, and planning and process are very important. But I also think that this is about leadership, and that coalition building is about leadership. And the first thing I think about is planning and process is about the work, and that's essential. But leadership is about the people. And so we have to focus on relationships. We have to focus on connecting with people. And I'll go back to the bridge analogy in that I saw a sign when I was riding down I-85, and ironically, it was at the time in which I-85 had burned and the bridge was down. And there was a big sign, an REI sign that said, "Bridges are built on purpose." And the irony of that was huge for me because I couldn't get across that bridge. But it was a double entendre that we have to hold on to. One, bridges are intentional. So we need to be intentional about our relationships, purposeful about our relationships. And two, they're built on purpose in that they are there and we put them there for a reason. And so our coalitions have to be intentional and we have to place them there for a reason. And so in this time in which we are upset with one another, we are angry, we are dismayed, we have to be purposeful to reach out and create relationship.
Rodney, thank you. Jay, let me ask you next. How do you view the state of Atlanta today, given everything that's happened here in our city since Friday and through the weekend and up until this afternoon?
Wow. Thanks, Jovita and Rodney. Yes, thank you for always being a bridge and a friend, sir. Atlanta is at a great inflection point. And I think that for far too long, the cost of perception has been killing our communities. As Ann eloquently stated, being the city too busy to hate, or the Black Mecca, and all of these things that we've actually leaned on as our monikers. When you peel back layers, as you said too, Ann, we just want things to go back to the way they were. But the truth is that Atlanta was going through an economic pandemic before COVID-19 hit. This thing is a powder keg, and this powder keg is filled with the souls of those that were unheard for decades in this city. We lead the country in income inequality before COVID. We led the country in economic immobility. A child born into poverty in Atlanta had less than a 4% chance of reaching the upper middle class. In the Black Mecca, a city that's 54% Black, it's unacceptable. So when we start thinking about the state of Atlanta, as you said, Rodney, those bridges, as you start thinking about people on the other side and start making assumptions, I think Atlanta's at this tipping point, and if we don't start addressing in a real and authentic way those issues that we've never really resolved, those issues that, the perception of being one thing is not the reality that exists for 54% of our population, the future of Atlanta is at stake. And we are at a pivotal point now where coalition building is critical, because we're going to need more than symbols of hope. We won't be able to program our way out of this. We won't be able to thoughts and prayers our way out of this. We're not going to need more than symbols of hope. We're going to need institutions developed to actually manufacture hope. And we're going to have to design systems that are designed specifically to defeat systems that have been in place for centuries. And it starts with people like that are on this panel. Thank you, Jovita.
And my follow-up to that, Jay, is can you talk about a meaningful experience or some outcome that you know of, you've been involved in, resulting from coalition building in the city?
Wow. You know, I'm blessed to be a part of one and sit in one right now. Herman J. Russell was one of the greatest entrepreneurs the city has ever produced. And the project that I'm most passionate about right now is the 54,000 square feet that we have in our city, where we're literally bringing the best in the city together, the Atlanta Wealth Building Coalition, access to capital for entrepreneurs, SBA, Invest Atlanta, all coming together to address the wealth gap and to provide access and opportunity and exposure to those who need it most at the H.J. Russell Center. It's certainly a plug from my part, but I think it does represent the best of our city. The opportunity to literally give people pathways and roadmaps to live out their dreams. I think the only difference between Buckhead and Bankhead is access, opportunity, and exposure. And if we start to build these institutions to provide that same access, opportunity, and exposure, and that child born in Atlanta feels like they have a pathway to live out their dreams, that type of coalition, taking the best of Chick-fil-A, a supporter of the Russell Center, taking the best of Ann Kramer's kind of coalition building, a board member at the Russell Center, we start to see the best of Atlanta manifest in a way that we haven't seen in many years. We got to put community first. And I think for a while, we've not done that. And we hope even at this center, it becomes one of those, one of many, we hope, one of those institutions that someone can touch and feel, believe in, and see as a symbol of hope and brick and mortar that is real beyond just a program.
Jay, thank you. Maria, I'm going to hop over to you and ask you the same question. Some meaningful experience or outcome that you've seen that has resulted from coalition building.
I would say that one of my favorite things about coalition building is that it provides an opportunity for us to find organizations and partners in the community who can shore up our weaknesses. I know that I don't know everything, and I know that our own organization can't possibly do everything, but there are organizations and other leaders and individuals in the community who have strengths that are our weakness. And I would say that one of the best things about coalition building is the opportunity to find partners, to find leaders who can help you see the things that you don't already know. One of the things that we've done at Leadership DeKalb was build in the community service projects module. And part of having done that for our organization was that we wanted to offer the leaders that were going through the program an opportunity to get to know their community better by service, through service. But also, we wanted to say to organizations in DeKalb County and in the region, what can we do to help you? We have 56 people that go through our program every year, and we wanted to harness their talent and reinvest them right back into the community immediately. So it isn't just a matter of figuring out what kind of weaknesses you have as an organization or as a leader that other people can help you with, but what you have to offer to other people and to other organizations. And what your assets are that can be a benefit to the community.
I've muted because the vacuum cleaner is nearby. So Maria, along those lines then, talk about tips to start coalition building for those who are listening and watching and they feel like now they want to do something because they've been motivated by what they've heard so far.
You know, I always feel that we are just 6 degrees apart from each other in Atlanta. When I was coming along, one of my favorite things to do was to look at the boards of directors lists of organizations that were really making strides in the community. And either I would know somebody directly on that list, or I would know somebody who would know somebody. And honestly, if you know Ann Kramer, you pretty much know somebody on somebody's board list. And then I would reach out and I would say, hey, can you make an introduction, pave the way, organize a lunch for me to get to know some folks from these organizations. We have to be willing to take the time to really meet people, to develop relationships. Rodney talked about this a few minutes ago. Be intentional. be forthright and take the time to schedule those lunches, schedule those breakfasts, and then be willing to really listen when you meet with those people. I think it's got to be granular, and it really starts with your own Rolodex. If you don't have a diverse Rolodex, that's the first thing to do right there, is to take inventory of who your friends are and who's in your phone book, and think about who's missing and go make those friends.
Thank you, Maria. I think many would agree we get comfortable, right, with who we know, and this may be the time to get uncomfortable. Bill, you're up next. So talk about critical changes that you think we have to make now in order to face the future effectively. You might be on mute.
I'm sorry. I thought you were in control of that. It's a long list of the things we have to do. And I would say the people that spoke before me would say a lot of the things that I would intend to say. It's easy to do things when the camera's on you. It's harder to do that work when the camera's off, right? So we're all hypersensitive right now. We're all on Zoom calls. We're all wanting to do our best. I think the real measure is how you're building coalitions and how you're building trust when the pressure's not on. So the narrative in Atlanta, I think, has been the city too busy to hate, and that we all work together and that we're all aligned. Those of us who work on the ground know that's not been true for a long time. But we can see in a time like this where we do come together. It begins with, and this is for me particularly, I need to stop and listen. I need to not make assumptions. I need to not judge the young people out on the street and what their emotions and what their feelings are. I need to look at my own circle of influence. And to Maria's point, we've all got that Rolodex or our circle, and we need to begin there. I've seen the foundations come together in town, where instead of going to one off of foundation, they came together at United Way and the Community Foundation. I've seen the food bank step up and distribute 40% more food. I've seen Foodwell Alliance, which is around urban agriculture. We have over 30 urban farms in the city. Most of those are African-American farmers. Have gotten no attention in the past. All of a sudden, food's very important today, isn't it? So we've got to get out of our silos, I think, and look at building coalitions where something like the food bank is critical to better health and educational outcomes. Something like urban farming is critical to access to food because they're probably not going to build a Publix on the west side of town anytime soon. So I think for myself, trust building, looking at my circle of influence, and being courageous in a time like this and finding out what my role is.
Thank you, Bill. And let me follow up by asking, as everyone else has sort of talked about their tips to start building a coalition, what would you tell to someone who wants to get involved and wants to do something, or those of us who want to go ahead and expand that Rolodex?
Well, we're all asking that question. I probably had 25 white folks call me and say, what can I do? And I think, well, why didn't you call me 6 months ago? Why are you calling me now? Start where you are. Start where you are. We all have that circle or a congregation or a business associates or neighborhood. We all have folks that trust us, and we have to speak our truth. We have to ask the hard questions. We have to be willing to be uncomfortable. And this is a very uncomfortable time, particularly for people in power and with strong influence. We should feel uncomfortable right now. So it's not that we've got to make big gestures. We need to make small gestures, build relationships, build trust, and then that will be revealed to us. There will be plenty of things for all of us to do, as there always has been.
Well, thank you. Nathaniel, I'm going to ask you next. Why is it important that we build coalitions, and what can all of us do to improve our communities?
Well, I think it's important for us to not just build coalitions, but build different coalitions. I think the coalitions that we have had in the past in Atlanta have not been inclusive. They have not reached as far as they should have to touch the communities that have been left behind by Atlanta's progress. I think, unfortunately, Atlanta is suffering from a bankruptcy of empathy. It has forgotten many people who have been left behind, and we have to recapitalize our city with love and a commitment to ensuring that all people have a chance to prosper within the context of Atlanta's growth. When we begin the process of developing and cultivating coalitions, we have to understand two key things. One is that it takes courage, real courage, to build authentic coalitions, not to just invite people who you're comfortable with or you're used to having conversations with, not people who may have the same degrees that you may have or the same circles behind your wages, but people who are able to bring a unique perspective and innovation. My biggest fear is that the city will end up in a place where we will continue to do the same thing and expect different results. And lastly, we have to understand that at the end of the day, change moves at the speed of trust. That we have to begin to create spaces where people have a chance to learn and trust each other. We talk a great deal about reform, and I think that it's important for us to help to facilitate real structural change. But reform without reconciliation will create a situation where we're just checking off boxes and not really creating the conditions where we all will have a chance to not only own the mistakes that we've made as leaders, but even more so apologize for them so we can move forward as a community. That's my perspective.
And if you had to add one best tip to start coalition building, what would that be?
I think for me, it really begins with what I said before. I think we all have to have the courage to care. When you have the courage to care, certain injustices begin to become intolerable. When you begin to care about someone else's child as much as you care about your own, when you're willing to ask real hard questions about whether the decisions that have been made in the past have actually benefited everyone, when you begin to embrace this idea that if it's not for all, it's not for us, then we actually begin to have an opportunity to move this city and this nation forward. But it all begins, in my opinion, with courage, and more so the courage to care.
Nathaniel, thank you for that. And again, thank you to all of the panelists for being here. We want to have now move into sort of an open discussion. I know it's a little tricky on Zoom, but these are just more general questions for discussion. And maybe you guys raise your hand or something so we can see before you start talking, and then we can kind of take turns so that we don't step on each other. But this is a question that I thought was really interesting here. And it says, how do we get beyond thoughts and prayers? So often when we hear about a tragedy or a problem, it becomes a hashtag, and then we talk about, sending you thoughts and prayers. And it kind of doesn't really go past that, right? You get that text message or you see that tweet, and then what? So here's the question: how do we get beyond thoughts and prayers? Who wants to go first to discuss?
Well, I'll go, Jovita.
Maria, thank you.
Yes. I think that you start small. We've had some discussion here about going through our phone books to see who we have in our Rolodex. And I think that one of the simplest things that can be done is to begin to open dialogue with people in the community. And I think right now that if you do not have a couple of calls or virtual Zoom meetings scheduled in the next 3 to 5 days, then you haven't really taken that first step to making change. The first thing to do is to reach out to people. Find other leaders who are thinking along the same lines of wanting to create change.
Davida, I'll add to what Maria said. You know, it's interesting when people say that, they typically say it because they really don't know what to say. And they really think that they can't do anything. But I think it's important for us, and Bill said it earlier, he said you have to do what you can do in your own power. And I often call this spending down your power. And we all have some power. It may be monetary in some cases, it may be time, it may be influence. But we all have something that we can do, and we have to take inventory of what that is. We all know somebody, we all can do whatever we can do. We have to take inventory. If you're at a law firm and you're a partner at a law firm, then you need to mentor someone who doesn't look like you, who may not have opportunities. If you're at a foundation, then we need to write checks. If you are mentoring someone else at a little league, you need to reach out and do what you can there. So we all have a power that we can spend.
And also, Shavita, just quickly, I read somewhere that faith without works is dead. And so, you know, I think that for many people who try to lean on their faith as a reason to step back and be passive, I would encourage them to go back and study the people that they honor in their respective faiths. Jesus was a revolutionary in many ways in speaking out against injustice, the same way that in the prophetic Gospels, we also see men who were honored because they were willing to stand against authorities that had forgotten the people. If we're going to have a real conversation about faith, then we need to have a real conversation about action. And that is the only way that real faith can be realized, is not just through prayer, but also through action.
And to that point,
Bill?
I would say I have nothing against thoughts and prayers. And I think if we frame this as a moral issue, then you've got to go back to your faith and say, where do I get the courage? Where do I get the energy? Go deeper into your own faith, because every faith tradition calls us to action. Every faith tradition. Every master, saint, and prophet through the ages has called us to see the divinity, you know, the sacredness of life. So if that's your orientation, go there and begin there. If you can write a check, write a check. If you're part of that 1 or 5%, then start there. I think when we say, and we've all said, to build trust, you've got to do something together. So you've got to take a risk to ask somebody that maybe you've never done anything with to say, would you do that with me? Could we read this book together? Could we watch this movie together? Could we have dinner together? But you've got to be together, I think, to break through just being kind of high level thought. So I find in my own faith journey that if I can't go to that well of information where I get my strength, then I'll eventually become cynical. You get worn out in this work. And this is a work of a lifetime. This is not something we're going to do over the next 30 days and change the name of high school or statue. This is what we're going to do our whole life. And if our question's not big enough to take our whole life to do it, we haven't asked a big enough question. So I would say, wherever you find that courage and strength, whether it's through faith, through friends, through family, or through your own actions, you've got to go there and then go out.
Jay, you wanted to add something?
Sure, and a big shout out to Dr. Key Holloman and the Village Market. Support is a verb, and I think it goes along with what we're talking about. But as we talk about thoughts and prayers, I've got to go back to dollars and cents. Poverty is a real thing in this city. And even if we all heal, even if we all sing songs, even if we all come back together, we hug it out, there is going to still be this massive wealth gap that only got widened by what we've experienced over these past couple of months. And I think that if we don't take a very deliberate look at poverty in this city, and you can't solve that. And I love what you said, Bill, because I agree with you, where faith must be the cornerstone, but the faith without works, as Nathaniel said it, we have got to look at the money conversation. Where is wealth generated? Where does wealth live? We start talking about innovation and how it exists in our marketplace now, making it apply. This conversation around economics, because the fires will die down, the marches and the rallies and the protests will stop. We'll get past this COVID-19 pandemic. And then what? Because most of our population, 71% of African Americans in the Black Mecca, liquid asset poor. If they had a $2,000 emergency, could not satisfy with their own resources. And even if we get back to a point where we love each other back to the way it was, we've got to deal with that, or we're just tipping on the very next thing that sets off this powder keg, because 54% of our population is not participating in our economy, and that's just not sustainable.
Well, you're exactly the right place, Jay.
Trying, Bill. We're on it, brother.
Rodney, was there something you wanted to add to that?
No, I think that's right. And I think that we also have to look at, and Jay is in a place in which, but there are many of us where we can further supply diversity. We can support economics in so many ways, and we don't talk about that enough. And Jay is absolutely right, but it's not just the poorest of the poor. We've also have to create this hierarchy of how are we creating Black wealth? How are we creating stages of Black middle class sustainability? And then how are we bringing people up as well? We have to think about it from the top down.
You know, Javita, I'd like to add that it's really important that we say that this is a marathon and not a sprint. These are not issues that we can solve in a couple of months. And coalition building doesn't happen overnight. It takes time. And I would encourage the people watching tonight to think about just how far they want to go with whatever they decide to do, and how much commitment are they willing to make for the cause, whatever the cause might be. Because it is life's work, as Bill mentioned earlier. It takes time, and it takes a long time. Systemic didn't happen overnight. It's not going to get undone overnight either.
All right, well, I will go on to the next question so we can continue, and we do have a great audience watching and listening as well. Here's one question. What are some of the ways that people from your industry, your field, your company are making a difference in the world right now? So here's a chance to kind of toot your horn, but in a way that can motivate and maybe spur some action for someone else to do something great. And let's see, Nathaniel, you want to start?
Sure, Javita. So, of course, as you may know, we've been at this for 10 years, working to advance this conversation about racial equity in Atlanta and in the South. And so, of course, I'm very excited now that new people have come to the party to engage in this conversation. I think for us, it's been really important in understanding that charismatic individuals can be somewhat effective, but we need institutions and organizations that are firmly planted on the ground to really play a role in moving this work forward. And that's what we've been doing as an organization, really working to create the capacity of our community partners and organizations from various sectors to come together and begin to influence the systemic inequities that we have seen in community. And so whether it be the work that we were able to do around expanding MARTA for the first time in 45 years, to engaging the Beltline to ensure that they had an equity policy, to the work that we're doing now in East Point to develop the first equity strategic plan in the state. It's not just about coming together as usual suspects, but it's about creating the conditions for new voices to be heard, and even more so, real change being translated into real solutions, which at the end of the day have to be real policy. So again, you know, what I would just say to close is, and it very much speaks to what Bill said, it takes all of us, you know, it takes the private sector, philanthropy, academia, government, all of us, and what we have tried to create through the work of the Partnership for Southern Equity is a conduit for an ecosystem to finally be realized in this region that can work together to advance racial equity. And the struggle continues, but I tell you, I wouldn't change a thing. And I'm just so thankful that we're at this moment right now.
And I think Javita and Maria, of course, I understand what you're saying completely and agree in a lot of ways. But I think that that's part of what fans the flames a bit. That when you tell what people would feel as an oppressed people, that it's a marathon. You know, it'll take a while to get there. I mean, how do I tell that to my son, who just got pulled over by a cop? That, you know, don't worry about it. He pulled a gun on you, but just be patient. There may come a time in your life while that won't happen. Or if we go over to the West Side in abject poverty, you know, things take time. The time is now. I think over these past 6 months, one of the knock-on effect of some of the expedients that we've seen in action over these past 3 months has shown us that it should not take as long as it's taken. We saw a federal government distribute more funds in 2 months than it did in the past 20 years. We've seen more corporations make pivots. We've seen larger contributions. We've seen foundations come together in a period of 30, 60, 90 days. I just want to stand on that we have seen now that action can come a hell of a lot swifter than we've been given that narrative before. And I think when you're talking about people don't have time to wait. I don't have time to wait on the next race shard. I don't have time to wait for the schools in my community to get better. I don't have time to wait on economic inequality. Like, I want to have a child in this city that has more than a 4% chance of reaching the middle class. I don't want to wait for that. I don't want to wait for the marathon. I think we have our duty to try to run that marathon in a sprint if it's at all possible. Chick-fil-A, UPS, because I will tell you what, guys, of all the conversations that I've had, and this is some real truth, and Bill, I love you being on this panel because this is what I'm talking about. Of all the conversations most of our audience and everybody's heard, there is one voice that's not at this table consistently, and it's of powerful white men. The ones that have developed the systems are not on these panels talking about how change and collaboration and coalition building happens, and we need that voice at the table. If they are the holders of those systems, then where are their voices when we're talking about dismantling them? I just don't think the marathon narrative works well for community anymore because we just can't wait.
You know, Jay, you're right. I think the will of the people is very powerful and very strong. Thank you for that.
I would just say Nathaniel's been doing this for 10 years. I've been doing it for close to 47 years. Remember Nathaniel coming out of college. I'm encouraged that Nathaniel Smith's sitting here with us right now, right? You know, my role is to lead from behind, to mentor, to connect, to use my influence to convene, to make people feel uncomfortable. I would say my generation, see these kids out on the street. I was out on the street in the 60s. But what did our generation do? It built a lot of wealth, but somehow that wealth didn't trickle down. You know, that whole trickle down thing, give it to us and it'll trickle down. It didn't trickle down. So here we are. So I think we have to own it. My generation has to own it. People in power have to own it. We have to change the narrative to know that why we're in the situation we are. Jay, if 70% of American people can't take that $2,000 hit, I mean, it's across the country. It's not just on the west side of Atlanta.
Right.
How do we allow that to go on? So I think we have to own it. We have to change that narrative. We have to have that sense of urgency while we're going to work on it our whole life. It doesn't mean we have to wait another 50 years for some of that to come to us, for that sense of empowerment.
And Javita, I think that Atlanta has a huge responsibility. as the city of Dr. King and other incredible leaders who the universe saw fit to be here, Maynard Jackson and all of these other incredible leaders, some leaders that will never be given the respect that they deserve, people like Rita Samuels and other people who work really hard to make Atlanta what it is. And if we're going to lift up ourselves as the Black Mecca, or as one person put Wakanda, which I disagree with, we've got to put our money as well as our actions where our mouth is. And we have a huge responsibility, not just to our community, but to the nation, to position ourselves as a leader in this conversation, not because it is the politically expedient thing to do, or because it'll give us good marketing points that we can use to attract new businesses to come into the city. It's because we owe it to the people like Bill and Ann and others who have sacrificed their lives, Columbus Ward in Summerhill and Peoplestown, who sacrificed their lives so we would have a chance to be the city that we are. And until we're willing to take that position and understand that being number one in those areas that you talked about, Jay, it's not good for us to be number one in income inequality or economic mobility, or as a region in the top 5 for the suburbanization of poverty, or the top 4 as relates to the challenges that we face around utility costs and the energy burden that poor folks have to pay every day for their energy bills. We've got to lead the way as a moral and as a leader in transforming community in ways that will inspire other cities and other regions in the nation to act in a different way. It has always been Atlanta's charge. And I think that the nation is looking to us again. The question is, at the end of the day, are we willing to answer that call in a real way this time? And I think over time, we'll be able to see whether we are or not.
Rodney?
Jovita, I fiercely agree with Jay. I think that economic mobility is the preeminent issue. And quite frankly, we haven't prioritized it. We talk a lot about all the other issues. And I grew up here in Atlanta. I grew up here in South DeKalb, and I think about my neighborhood in South DeKalb versus a neighborhood in Buckhead. And frankly, all the people in South DeKalb that I grew up with want their children to have the same things as all the people in Buckhead. But the main difference was a difference of economics. And so all the ills that we feel, the ills of education, the ills of health disparities, all the ills that we feel really emanate from a difference in economics. And we have to prioritize that. We have to name it. And we have to say, we're going to make sure that we make the narrative of, look, we need to have more powerful white men on this call. Well, we need to have more powerful people on this call, because I want that to be more powerful women, more powerful Black and brown people as well, who have means, financial means and other means. And we need to spread the wealth there. So that's a priority for us. And I think oftentimes, look, we have to continue to prioritize things like food, hunger, homelessness, et cetera. But we also have to understand where they emanate from. And they emanate at the end of the day from a disparity of economics. And so we got to prioritize that and put that first.
Anne, did you want to add anything? You're on mute, but I see you nodding your head, so I wasn't sure if you wanted to say something.
Well, I think we're still waltzing around the system of racism.
Yes.
That has been the systemic and structural barrier for, well, as we've said it, since 1619. That pandemic is the one that will cripple us even more. And yes, it yields itself in economics and education and health and transportation and access and influence. And until we name racism and have it with a way that we can begin to dismantle those systems and structures, that's the place where I work every day relative to legislation, education, and create the space for the racism to be named, claimed, and then destroyed. And yet I also understand that even reconciliation is a hard word, and that seems surface. unless we talk about healing, which means you got to puncture the wound and look at the pus and go to the deep end and really saw this stuff. It's a hard wound to heal. But until you clear it out and talk about it in terms that have a healing effect, both for those of us that are white and those of us who are Black and or brown, we can't move forward. And we can talk around it. Raphael Bostic's most amazing essay that he just put out was about racism. And yes, Rodney and Nathaniel, it was about economics, right, Jay?
Right.
Jay and I discussed it yesterday. And it's about how do we look at all those systemic issues, education, healthcare, housing, hunger, everything that we've named collectively, unless we can look at every person as a child of God and look at the human dignity and destroy that sense of, as a white person, I'm better than any other. Nah, not going to work. So naming that as a part of who we are and how we move forward will also be in tandem with those other issues that relate to the, as we say, the pillars of economics, education, healthcare, and those the housing and hunger. And safety, yes, safety. So thank you, Jovita. You could tell I was getting riled up in here.
Does anyone want to comment? Anyone want to talk about then how do we get, and Rodney, I hear what you're saying too about not just powerful white men, but powerful people. But if we want to specifically say, how do we get more powerful white men to jump in and do something or lean in or stand up or whatever phrase you want to use, how do we make that part happen? Maria, Jay?
Well, as a white man, it's up to me to talk to those white men, right? And that's my job. That's not African Americans' job. That's my job. So I've got to spend my capital that way. It may be that I entice them with, oh, let's go do something great together, or it may be I embarrass them. It may be that I challenge them. You know, we've got to approach it different ways. But I think that's my responsibility. I'm owning that. And to your point, owning our histories to own that there's been racism from the very beginning. We took the country away from some folks, then we brought Africans here to build it. You know, we got to own that.
And I appreciate that, Bill, because, you know, one of the lessons that I've learned in really growing PSC is the importance of building your own table. And, you know, I think it's important to try to encourage white men to get involved. I think we need everybody to have an awakening and get involved. But I don't think that the work should slow down so they can catch up. I think that it's the responsibility of great people who we love and respect, like Bill and Ann and others, to do that job. My responsibility is not to convince white men why they need to do what's right. I think that's a conversation that they need to have. And quickly, I just want to know, I don't want to run out of time, but this question around racism versus economics is a very critical conversation. And I do think that, you know, the work around economic equity and economic inclusion is actually a program of my organization. And I think it's critical to do that. But we can never lose sight that economics didn't save Auburn Avenue when the Planning Commission decided to build a highway through it. Economics didn't save Tulsa. It didn't save Forsyth County when Black folks who own land were run out of town. Economics is a tool, and it's a key thing that we have to leverage in order for us to liberate ourselves. But at the end of the day, if we don't begin to address the issues of structural racism, and not only structural racism and how they manifest themselves within the context of white folks, but how structural racism can be advanced by Black folks as well. And I've seen that well in the city of Atlanta. We're going to continue to have the challenges that we're facing today.
Thank you. I have a question from someone who is watching. And the question is, how do we transition, or how do I transition to a two-way productive dialogue that results in two-way learnings? Can someone answer that?
We're going to have to stop being polite.
Enlarging the circle.
No, go ahead.
From two.
Jay said stop being polite, and Bill, what are you saying?
I didn't know if it was, we have to stop being polite. I think that there's so many people. I just had a conversation doing a speech for a consulting firm here, and they were talking about, well, we don't want to offend, we don't want to bring things up, and we were afraid of being told that we have privilege, and the silence is the thing that's the silent killer. And I think that we are afraid to have the tough conversation. The way the question is posed is about, how do I have a two-way conversation? Start it. And if you get something wrong, then as Bill just said, okay, own it and keep dialoguing until you get it right. And I think far too often the tough conversations are the ones that we run away from because we lack the courage to say, Maria, maybe I don't agree, or Ann, I think that's the wrong way to do that, or Bill, I just don't believe what you're saying. Yeah. There's a common humanity to communication and dialogue, but it comes out of respect and courage and an authentic purpose in your resolve. If I'm starting a conversation with Rodney not to find resolution and there's no authenticity to it, of course I don't want to have that conversation because I'm not right in the beginning. Time for real and authentic dialogue and to get started.
And I would to build on what Jay said, language is very important here. Mm-hmm. I know when I started the food bank, I started the minister in a church. I'm on fire for the idea. I go over to Alterman Foods and I'm saying it's wrong for you to throw away the food. You should give me that food. I got thrown out of the office first 3 times I went in there. I had to figure out, is it a good business proposition for them to get that food? And it was, and we figured that out. And after a year or so, they said, well, this is working very well for us, Bill. We're making more money. How's it working for you? And I said, we're going to find ways it's going to work for me. There's other ways for you to engage. They helped me with the warehouse, with inventory. There are many ways, and a lot of people aren't even aware of those gifts. You've got to push and ask and pull that out. So to Jay's point, because the conversation gets uncomfortable or the language is not one that we understand, we've got to keep working at it.
I'm going to go back to what Jay was saying about dialogue for a second. I think it's really important to give people a safe space to ask questions, because there are no dumb questions right now, in my opinion. Only unasked questions are dumb questions. If you don't know the right words to use, if you don't know the right thing to say, but you know some people who can help you with that. I know for a fact that we've had some people on our board who didn't know the right words to use right now. Should they be saying African Americans? Should they be saying Black people? They really didn't know, and they asked the question. And then very healthy dialogue came out of that, because we had Black people on our board who said, no, it's okay to say Black people right now, because the movement is called Black Lives Matter, not people of color lives matter, Black lives matter. And then they went on to explain why those words were important. I think creating a safe space where people can ask honest questions is really important right now. I think we could really help each other learn and understand. I know I have a lot to learn myself. And I value my friends that will allow me to ask my dumb questions.
Nathaniel, you're on mute.
Okay.
Okay, go ahead.
I think it's important for us all people, to listen, to understand, and not to respond. I think a lot of times people, before someone has an opportunity to get a word out of their mouth, we're thinking of ways to respond to that retort. And I think that we need to do a lot more listening to understand than to respond. We've been caught up in this news talk media environment where everyone is supposed to have an answer or response to everybody's statement. And we're verbally jousting each other, but we're not really finding common ground. And so what I try my best to do, regardless of whether it's people that disagree with our work or not, is to really sit with them and try to listen first and try to understand where they're coming from before I respond.
I have two questions that are very similar, one from Brookhaven and one from the Bronx. But people in the audience want to know, and they're asking concrete steps to build coalitions and continue the work. And then someone specifically says also action steps, but pointed out to Rodney saying, spend on Black business, create Black wealth. So they're asking similar questions. What are the thoughts for practical, actionable, concrete steps to build coalitions?
My experience, we've got to connect the dots. I've worked in food security and affordable housing through the years, but I often got challenged even by my own board of why you're doing a housing forum at a food bank. Because everybody that we're giving food to is paying too much rent, is not making enough wages. So it's important to connect the dots. At the housing forum, we've had forums on transportation choices. If you don't have transportation choices, you can't get to work. We've had it on education. You know, in certain schools in town, 30% of the students are moving from school to school. You can't run a school like that. So affordable housing, access to food, having a safe place for the kids to play, all these things are connected. So it's not like you've got to do everything, but you've got to understand where your circle is connected to another circle. And then we've got to build that larger narrative.
Rodney?
Jovita, I would add that you have to first find people who have a like mind. And so first start with people who are trying to do similar things to you. And then broaden that circle and bring other people into that circle. Be intentional. To Maria's point, go out and start to network, breakfast, lunch, and dinner. But be intentional about what you're doing. Spend is important. And the other question that was asked, and I guess directed at me, was Black spend. And Black spend is important. And I'm not necessarily saying that you have to just go to a Black company. Look, I work for Chick-fil-A, but I'm very aware that 16.9% of the people who work, who eat our product are African American. And so we have to be mindful of that. One of the things that we're doing to honor that, in addition to the dollars that we spend on the West Side, which is significant, over $40 million, we're taking our True Inspiration Awards, which is our award ceremony, and we're focusing that on the Black community for the next year. And we're quadrupling the amount of money that we're going to give. That's the way in which we can continue to be a part of this. And that's important. We gave $1 million to the Russell Center for Innovation and Entrepreneurship. That's important. And so there are ways in which we can all spend our power, as I said earlier. But first, with the coalition building, first, we got to find those who are like-minded.
All right, thank you. Justin in Peachtree Corners is asking, how does the media help or hurt? And how do politics play a part or not? And I'll let any of you answer either part of that.
Well, Jovita, we're all wondering what you say about that.
I know. That one was directed to you.
I'm just here to moderate.
You know, I will take this moment to even plug my wife, who's an NBC correspondent. And we've had many a conversation about the relevance of her getting to that position with a major network, because our stories deserve a certain level of empathy and connection that they may not have had before. And that goes back to this representation, that goes back to that equity conversation. But I will liken back to the earlier question that you talked about, Jovita, and what Rodney said as well as Bill. We can't wait on superheroes that wear capes, that are in elected positions or senior executives. I love the Issa Rae model. Issa Rae started a show with the friends that were around her. And Insecure is one of the best shows. My wife and I watch it every week, but she didn't wait on the superstars to say that I've got something good that should be heard, that is of value, and I have a voice. Find your tribe right where you are, start where you stand. Then, you know, that's where you start to force policy that Nathaniel's talking about. You start to build these coalitions that can join coalitions. But I think far too often we wait for this great singular leader to come from the sky. or this great politician to be elected to save all things, or this corporate leader to say that we're going to give so much. Chick-fil-A can't give enough money to solve the problem. Coca-Cola can't hire enough Black and brown people to solve the problem. We've got to start looking inwardly to community and finding the power that is within all of us. And that part is the piece that we miss. And I think when you talk about media, we're crippled by this little box that sits in front of us or in our hands every day. And that's the advocacy, the only advocacy that we have. And not often enough does it reach beyond the laptop or the cell phone. Again, support is a verb. You can start with where you are, and your voice needs to be heard.
So Vida, I'll add to that, that media has a responsibility. And I won't get into whether it helps or hurts, but I will say that it has an amazing ability to bring people together. It has an amazing ability to report facts and report facts accurately. And then conversely, we have a responsibility as consumers of the media to go beyond what we see on Facebook, to go beyond what we read, and to go beyond what we see even on Channel 2. And so we have to make sure that we get the facts right. And we do that by building coalitions. We do that by getting to know one another. Because if I get to know Maria, and no matter what you say about Maria, I'm going to know the facts and I'm going to know the truth. And so that's important that we really build bridges amongst ourselves.
I would encourage folks who are interested in this. There's a national conversation going on. You can go to the Knight Foundation website, and there are webinars, there's conversations, there's op-eds. There's 600 to 700 people that show up in Miami every year to have this conversation. There's a thing called solutions journalism. I would encourage people to look that up. It's a different way of approaching journalism. We've lost over 138 newspapers in the last 10 years. How are we going to maintain a democracy without some accountability, without a way to tell our story and to change that narrative? So this is a huge conversation, I think, for us. Just look at what the Russell Center's doing and tell those stories. That is so empowering, and it gives you a sense of hope. If you look at what's going on with the West Side Future Fund or what Chick-fil-A's done, invested over there, that gives you a sense of hope, and those things we can build on. We are going to have to decide what the value of journalism and media is, because we're going to have to pay for it. It's always seemed like it's free. It's free because you can sell advertising and sell conflict. If we want to change that narrative, we're going to have to pay for it. But there's huge conversations going on in town with the Supporter Report, with the newspapers, with the Knight Foundation, with the Ford Foundation. I'm on the board of the Blank Foundation. We've actually invested in this. So while a lot of people don't know about it, I would encourage you to really dig in, because it's an area that we can change.
And I think, and one more piece of that is in public broadcasting, which is our last really local opportunity to have that trusted media source where, in fact, any of us can be a stringer and provide information and the opportunity to tell a story. Because what is media but telling our story? And to have that trusted source where it comes both from folks who are in the community as well as those who can help interpret it, who are the journalists who can look at it through a lens of, as we would like to say, truth, facts, and the kind of respect that we have, the dignity of telling a story. So I think the challenge for a lot of us is that sometimes, and poor Javita, and I love Javita, when we look at the private sector media, which has become, because it's commercialized, and as you said, Bill, so much of the newspapers have been closed, and we've reduced the number of journalists, is how we look at the public broadcasting network across where we have some trusted local media sources that can help us tell that story.
Javita, wasn't there a second part to that question about politics?
The second part was also, does politics help or hurt? So does the media help or hurt? And then politics. Does politics help or hurt? Yeah.
I think policy helps, but politics doesn't. And unfortunately, you can't separate the two. I think a lot of times our divisions around political ideology, you know, whether you were a D or an R, or whether you were a conservative or a progressive, has overshadowed the key question, in my opinion, about, you know, whether it's right or wrong. And so, you know, I think that people have spent millions of dollars developing messages around their point of view. And sometimes, you know, those dollars have created, in my opinion, the conditions where people aren't necessarily willing to listen to anybody anymore. It's about, I'm right and you're wrong. And I think that our community and our world is suffering now because people didn't understand the real ramifications of winning a battle, but losing the war of humanity. And so I do think it can be an issue, but I also think when we think about media and politics, you know, I'm a big history person, you know, where would the civil rights movement be without the media? You know, where would, you know, in Birmingham, Alabama, you know, when Bull Connor attacked children in Birmingham, you know, where would that be without the media showing the march on the Edmund Pettus Bridge, or even just to give a shout out to Channel 2, the race town hall that you all did. I think it was really, really wonderful. And I think that media does have a chance to play a role in healing and shining a light and creating good tension. And I think that we need more of that. We need more of that.
We are almost out of time, y'all, believe it or not. So before we close, I do want to pose this question because it was something that I thought about, but again, I'm just trying to moderate and not necessarily inject. But Bill talked about taking responsibility for white males. So Greg in Atlanta asked this question, but should the position of institutional leadership organizations like Outstanding Atlanta, like Leadership Atlanta, like Leadership DeKalb or Leadership Buckhead, should those organizations be accountable to hold leaders, be in a position to hold leaders accountable for being part of that transformational change? And shouldn't our programs hold accountability as well?
Get a big yes, everybody.
So I'm sitting over here nodding because you will recall about 5 years ago, there was a lot of not so positive news about DeKalb County. And there were many leaders in that community who were being investigated. And our organization, Leadership DeKalb, took a look at some of the folks that were under investigation. And it occurred to us that a lot of them had gone through the Leadership DeKalb program. And so we turned inward as an organization and we said, what can we do? If these leaders are going through our door, going through our program, how can we better equip leaders to be better leaders? And we implemented a new program day starting in 2015 called Integrity and Ethics. Because a lot of the issues that were going on were around that very topic, integrity and ethics. And so we implemented a program where we talked about what is integrity, what is ethics. They're not necessarily the same thing. How do they work together? We brought in speakers who would have very open conversation about what it means to be an integral leader, what you should do when no one is watching, not just when people are watching, but when the spotlight is not on you is really when integrity really plays a key role. So I think organizations like Leadership DeKalb, Leadership Atlanta, Outstanding Atlanta, in their own programming can really make change because we are responsible as organizations for making better leaders. And we need to turn to our own programs to make sure that we are doing just that, to equip people to be better at who they are and what they do.
Maria, thank you. I want to, unless you have just something you have to say. Okay, so in the essence of keeping us on time, begin the close. because we also need time for Candace to come up in the last few minutes and close us out. So my last question to each of you would be, what's your call to action today for the audience watching and listening, how they can begin today to build coalitions where they are? And each one of you, I want you to add into that, and then Candace will come up and close us out. So Rodney, I'll start with you. I'm looking, you're to my immediate right, so I'll start with you on the screen.
So what can you do to build coalitions right now? When I first got into this job, Ann Kramer told me that you can basically look around you and you can connect, and either you can be a convention builder, you can be a catalyst. And so find a way to connect with somebody that you didn't know before, create a bridge, be a friend, and move them. And then recognize when they have done something great. We got to recognize the people who are on our side, who are on our team. We got to applaud that much more than we do, so that people continue to fight this fight.
Bill?
I think we all have to do the hard interior work to really know what we believe. And if you do that work, then the second question is what you're willing to pay for. That's the work.
Jay? You're on mute. Okay, you're off.
We can't let perfect stop progress. I think that we want to get it completely right before we do anything. I've had many opportunities to sit down with the great C.T. Vivian. One of the most prolific things he ever said to me was, son, all the power is in the doing. And to everybody, find problems that you can do something about and do something. And I think that is really where we go from start where you stand. Everybody feels paralyzed, but there's something that you can do it.
Nathaniel?
I would just say, I think all of those recommendations are great. I would say that folks begin to finally support organizations that have been doing this work. I think a lot of times people want to recreate the wheel, but as you can see from this panel and others, there are a lot of organizations that have been on the front lines for a long time, working to advance an agenda that would realize a more inclusive and just Atlanta. Seek them out. Volunteer or write a check. It's okay. Write a check. And those organizations would be very appreciative of your support. And I promise you, by doing that, you'll have an opportunity to not only create a coalition, but create coalitions that are truly reflective of the genius, in my opinion, that can be found in Atlanta.
I'm going to hop over to Maria. So before we go to Ann and then Candace, Maria, what is your call to action today? Something that people can do right now where they are?
I think everyone has talent and value. And there are many organizations in Atlanta that are looking for talented, valuable people to volunteer and get involved. And if you are not volunteering with any organizations today, I would encourage people to begin researching volunteer opportunities tomorrow.
Thank you. Thank you to all the panelists. I think we lost Ann just in that last moment. So unless she reappears, I want to thank you all for having this conversation. And I'm going to turn it over to Candace now so she can close us out.
Hello, everyone. First of all, thank you so much for your time this evening. Jovita, I know you are jumping right off the newscast right into this panel discussion, and we appreciate you for doing this. This is such an important and timely conversation to be having right now, and I think that the people who have been logged on and communicating with each other in the feed have really, really enjoyed the conversation and the dialogue. I want to thank Ann and James for helping to coordinate this event, and also thank the panelists for having such a direct, open conversation and sharing great feedback, tips, and advice that our listeners can go ahead and start putting into action right now. And one way everybody listening online can go ahead and put this into action is by taking advantage of this great organization. So one way that you can become a part of the organization is by applying, and applications are open right now. I will go ahead and post a link in this group and this event, and also on our page. You can go to our website, outstandingatlanta.org/apply, and you can apply today. You just need to be at least 21 years old and not as old as 40 years old to be considered to be someone in this organization. So please go out and do that right now. And I encourage everyone to take an opportunity to look around and see how they can begin building a coalition today. Thank you.